that emotion and that intensity kind of helped propel me to heights that and capabilities that I didn't know existed. But getting right to that edge where your engagement is really high, totally in the moment, you have focus, you're not distracted, kind of gravitate to some of those guys that will help you get to that edge, right? That right level of engagement.
Welcome back, or welcome to Grateful and Full of Greatness. I'm your host, Mark Glicini. On this podcast, I sit down with guests who, in my opinion, live their lives with the pursuit of greatness in mind. This platform allows me to discuss and to explain strategies that go into reaching peak performance. This is episode 56. My guest is, again, Brodie Merrill. In the world of lacrosse, he needs no introduction. He's a Hall of Fame and world-class athlete, brilliant coach, caring captain, devoted husband, and father. Exactly 4 years ago, and 1 month before the pandemic of the coronavirus hit the world, we sat down for round one, and I'm grateful to have him back. He's a dear friend and a wealth of knowledge, and I can't wait for him to share with our community. Brodie, thanks for coming back for round two.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. Time has definitely flown by since then. And yeah, I think you and I had it's cool because we both eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff that we're talking about today, right? And it was cool kind of going through that in a season, like playing together, right? And then kind of talking about it, reflecting on it, and dealing with our own little challenges as we go through it, right? So that was definitely a pretty cool experience.
Well, I'm a pretty spiritual guy. I mean, there's no reason that we needed to be teammates, but I'm really grateful that we were. And the reason why I wanted to have you back on is, as I said right before we started recording, is, I've changed, I've evolved, you have too, the world has, but you're kind of like a modern day gladiator, Brodie, in a lot of ways. You've been in the arena. And like I said in the introduction, I want the community to learn from them. Like I have parents that reach out to me, new coaches, high school coaches, players at different levels. But before we go into that, I guess I would just ask you, now that you've transitioned over the last 12 to 18 months away from the game and had your jersey hang up in the rafters, how would you summarize your time on the field, floor, and rinks that you played on?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think as a professional lacrosse player, the transition has been a little bit easier because we're fortunate enough to be able to build a career kind of in parallel to playing, and so I was always kind of jealous of the full-time athletes that can just devote every day to just going in and training and playing. But life as a professional athlete, as you know, a professional lacrosse player, as you know, you need to have kind of a day job, and so that transition has been, I think, easier than most, probably compared to other sports. But it also comes in little ways where I'll be watching games, or you're always kind of preparing for that next game or that next opportunity, and so that's been a little bit of a shift for me as well, just that competitive energy. But I'm fortunate enough now to coach my kids a lot, which is really fulfilling, and also coaching at the Hill and having some unique opportunities, just like recently with the Boston Cannons too. And so, I think overall, just like really kind of when I think about my career, just really a lot of gratitude for all the great people and teammates and coaches and experiences. And I think since I've kind of retired, they're coming back to me at different times, at different moments. But overall, just very, very thankful.
Yeah, and congratulations on the championship series. I mean, you go right from a player to winning again. And something that gripped me as I was listening back to our first time 4 years ago is you said the game is part of me inside of our podcast. And that line really resonated with me from our conversation. And, like I said, Hall of Fame player, veteran coach. Maybe could you just talk about what lacrosse, the sport specifically, means to you?
As I got older, I started to get a little bit more in tune with this, right? Because as a younger player, coach, it can be a little bit transactional, right? Where it's like you're playing for fun or to win that next trophy, or to because maybe what your friends are doing, but as you get more time and you start to learn more about the game and yourself, it really, when it says, what's cool about lacrosse, I'd say this for all sports, but it's definitely a cool way of phrasing it. Like the lacrosse is a medicine game, right? You play it because it makes you feel better when you coach it, when you play it, when you watch it. And that started to resonate with me a little bit more later in my career, and just I feel like you can be fully in the moment. And then you test yourself physically, mentally, emotionally, and so I've learned. I've built a lot of confidence. I think just personally, just going through some of the challenges that the game presents. And I think that's one thing I would say for young players and coaches is that sometimes we want to avoid those things, but I think that's where I think you learn the most is going through that. I remember talking to Brian actually before we were it was great because we're both love the game so much, and we're just talking about our past in the game. And you kind of think of those, some of the best moments usually come after like some adversity or really, really tight stretch, like really tight games, and before the game, we both kind of agreed in the championship series, like it's going to come down to the last second. It's something crazy, right? When you're at, when you're at that level, and just embrace it all, right?
Right.
So that was kind of a long-winded answer, but it grabbed a hold of me, and I think beyond just playing it, it just the fun in playing it. I think it's just taught me a lot about myself.
I was listening to a podcast recently about a Harvard professor who's, I guess he teaches about happiness, and his classes fill up like automatically. And his name is escaping me, but something that he did talk about is he was kind of taking these complex terms like happiness and satisfaction and talking about what actually goes into them. And I remember him saying there is no satisfaction without a little bit of suffering. And I think it's an amazing way of looking at it, just like you brought up in terms of something crazy is going to happen. There's going to be adversity that we're going to need to go through. And once we're on the other end of that adversity, it is extreme jubilation or disappointment, right? There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it.
It is, and sometimes that's like years, like and where you can hit those kind of breakthroughs, and it gives you overall perspective. But I think if you when you it helps you deal with it in the moment as you're going through it, right? That suffering or that struggle or that adversity. If you kind of flip the script a little bit and think, all right, this is good. I'm learning more about myself, or learning more about my team, learning more about my teammates, my players, and then I'm gonna respond, right? And and it does make you appreciate, when you do have those breakthroughs, for sure.
Yeah, and I think from a psychology perspective, that's the constant focus is reframing that. Just look at that slightly differently, even when it rains outside. Yeah, like it's not a great day to do a bunch of activities, but maybe the flowers needed it. That sort of reframe. You brought up two answers ago the test and the challenge of physically, mentally, and emotionally. How I actually wanted to start the first quarter of this podcast was with a section of what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were first starting out. And I guess I wanted to go through a series real quickly. If you could give first a main messaging to kind of a young student athlete, maybe in the middle school or high school, because I'm sure maybe the advice is different for different levels. And I wanted you to go through, if you're okay with that, the middle school or high school athlete first.
Yeah, it's play the long game. So for me, and actually and you'll find this too, I'm sure you can speak to this, just being around at the professional level gives you kind of perspective on the earlier stages, right? Where a lot of the players that are at that level were maybe not the best player growing up, right? Or had been overlooked or doubted or cut, multiple times. And but that kind of love and dedication never wavered. And so for me, I was very much a late bloomer. I was never the top player on any of my teams growing up. I was kind of always middle of the pack. I love working at the game though, and I love practice, and I loved the conditioning side of it, and so. But there was definitely that stage. I'd say grade 8, grade 9 was like my toughest years in sport because I was kind of a faster athlete when I was really young. But then my body was changing, I had to hit a big growth spurt. Um, I was, I was pretty slow actually. I didn't make my grade 8 elementary school track team. And then it took a couple of years, probably 16, 17, for me to start to grow into my body a little bit. And so I think patience is key, is sticking with it and understanding that when it feels kind of like it's over, kind of like it did for me at that stage, it's really kind of just beginning, right? And so play the long game, be patient, but focus on your controllables and learning the game, continuing to build your skill and your IQ and kind of these more sustainable skills, right? And then as you can kind of catch up physically, you'll be able to separate yourself. But so that would be kind of my message for kind of middle school, high school. You don't want to be necessarily the best grade 10 in the country. Country, right? You want to try to keep building and keep staying kind of in the game, right? And I think for me too, in terms of my confidence, I was always really lanky, skinny. Everybody used to make fun of how skinny I was and how skinny my legs were, and things like that. I think for me, when I discovered the weight room, that was a big thing, and because it doesn't require any talent, and I started to see kind of the more those tangible results, the harder I worked, and so I think that's a good kind of staple for young athletes is as you get introduced to that, like make that your thing. Find some good, a strength and conditioning coach locally, a good peer group to work out with, some of your buddies that are also into it. And, that could be a way to kind of bridge the gap or separate yourself a little bit as well.
Yeah, I think I mentioned it the first time we spoke about when I heard that you got cut from that track team. Discipline becomes desire. This idea that I have to do something becomes I get to and I want to when you notice progress, when you go through the progress, and once you have that progress, you're like, whoa, this is really momentous. This feels good. You start to move more weight in the weight room, and you start to get faster, and then maybe there's tangible results in the sport in and of itself as well. So play the long game is what I took away right from those early teenage years. What about that college athlete as you get later into the game? What advice would you give to them?
So I remember my first ever practice at Georgetown and thinking, holy, like how good is everyone here, right? Every single player on that field. And I thinking just where do I fit in? And there's probably 50 guys on the roster. There's only 17, 18 that play on Saturdays, right? So just trying to, but it was good news and bad news for me because player by the name of Kyle Sweeney, he was just inducted into the U.S. Hall of Fame. He was the best LSM in the country. He was a 2-time first-team All-American. Prior to, I think he ended up being a 4-time All-American. But he was really good with me. He was 2 years older, so we played the same position. So the good news was I got this firsthand look at the example, right, of kind of everything I wanted to be as a player. The bad news was I was a backup LSM, and he never came off the field. Right? So I got very kind of limited playing time my first 2 years. So that was tough. But in the same breath, I wouldn't have traded that for the world because I was picking up so much from him, and he was really good with me too. And I'll forever be thankful to him for that because you can see in some scenarios where it can be competitive, where there's a younger guy coming up and whatever. But he really kind of took me under his wing, taught me some of the nuances of the position. We pushed each other in terms of the conditioning. I still remember I'll go off on a tangent, but for some reason we had a mile run, but we had class or something, so we couldn't run it with the team. And so we ran it head to head, a mile. And I swear, like, I've never run faster in my life. It was like we were both going. We sprinted the entire mile, and we both hit a speed I don't think we could ever get to if we had even within our team. Right? It was just like that pure competition and kind of big brother, little brother thing. And he was dragging me along. And I think that was also in my game, right? That was also at practice every day.
Mm.
It was kind of pushing my potential. And so, yeah, so and then he actually, my sophomore year, his senior year, he broke his ankle with like a month left in the season. Um, and so this was our best player going down, and also somebody that you want to kind of win for, right? And to see it in his senior year was pretty devastating for him and our whole team. And then but that gave me a little bit of an opportunity to get in and play and kind of understand that I could play at that level. And then I kind of carried that through my last 2 years, where I kind of broke out and found my game, and it kind of came together. I think that was, we kind of talk about entering kind of the prime of your, of your little bit of experience, but now you got the physical tools, the mental tools to start to kind of put it together. So yeah, I would say that early college years, a little bit of growing pains, some great mentorship. We had a Tewaaraton winner, Steve Dussault, who's now a doctor, who just like some great examples around, and Kyle and others and a really good class where we had some great intercompetition, and great coaches with Coach Urick. And so I was really fortunate, and I had a great experience, and some early struggles, and then kind of broke out kind of mid to later stages.
Amazing. I think I talk about most when I talk about lasting performance enhancement, behavioral change, are standards, goals plus an action plan, and then the power of role models. And the things that I was writing down as you were talking is nobody knows that or thinks about Mahomes as a backup, right? He was a backup right before he was great. And then the next thing is that picture of you guys running neck to neck. One of the best documentaries I've ever watched is Strokes of Genius with Federer and Nadal, right? Them pushing each other to go to another level. If they weren't each playing at the same time, they probably would have more majors than Novak Djokovic, but they just kept pushing each other to another level and to another level. And then the final thing is that Drew Bledsoe just signed like a multi-year contract and then gets hurt. And if he doesn't get hurt, there's no Tom Brady. And I think about how, yes, following and having patience. Again, I think the same answer, right? Maybe mentors were added to your second answer, but still having that patience and studying and learning and biding your time, right, for that breakthrough. But I think people lose sight that Mahomes was a backup. And so was Brady. And you have to really learn. And then when your time is, you better be prepared for it. Right.
Yeah.
And
For sure. And you don't know when that opportunity will come. And I think in the meantime is watching others, being around others. Like with Steve Dussault, he was, again, the best player in the country. He was a senior. I was a freshman. Used to have to sign up for individual sessions at that time in our off season. I'm not sure if that was the same at Yale. But like in that off season, you're allowed to have individual sessions. Anytime Steve Dussault signed up for it, I was signing up for it, right? Every single time. And so I think there is something to be said for trying to go against the top players and like watch what they're doing. Go through some of those growing pains. I also think in the collegiate environment, being the first one there, last one to leave kind of mindset will really help in that competitive environment.
Brodie, where do you get that competitive edge? Have you always had it?
I think I have had it. I've always, as long as I can remember, even back to my early stages of sport, playing soccer and baseball, even before I started playing lacrosse, I had that. I just loved sport and competition. So I'm probably from both my parents who were athletes as well, and I think my siblings probably brought that out in me as well. That kind of that competitive spirit. I've had some coaches too that were um, that kind of demanded that and had that intensity that would maybe help me tap into that as well a bit. But you would probably know the answer better than I, whether it's kind of nature or nurture, but probably some kind of combination there.
Yeah, a combination. I think it has to do with finding the thing that you're interested in. I was just listening to Daniel Presley. This guy helps entrepreneurs because he started company over company, making millions of dollars, and he developed a process about it. And he came up actually with a procedure of looking at passion. And what he said is it's made up of origin, vision, and mission. And what origin, which is really why I want to bring it up, is what were you interested in growing up that you're still interested in now? And I think people lose sight of that, right? And they get in something else that's not their origin, not their interest. And I think that hockey and lacrosse was your interest and you found it inside of that. And then you had the mentorship and guidance and influence of siblings and coaches that really took that to another level. I guess I just want to interject here something that I wanted to make sure I brought up during our podcast is Novak Djokovic was on 60 Minutes. And he gave one of the best definitions of mental strength that I had heard, and it was not staying in your emotions too long. Not staying in your emotions too long. And the reason why I like that is because we're not robots. We do have that emotional eruption. And this is a question I have for you: is right? You play with a bunch of passion, Brodie, a bunch of emotion, right? It's obvious, right? But the key is to play with emotion, but not become too emotional. Right? How were you able to deal with that through your years playing?
Oh yeah, that's a tough question, and it's funny because I heard that quote recently too, and we were actually talking about it. Marcus Holman was talking about that in our championship series, because you're giving yourself a little bit of license, right? Like it's okay. It's natural to feel that or to get off course or become emotional. Um, but what are some strategies to get yourself back? I think it's um, I have a tough time because sometimes I really that emotion and that intensity kind of help propel me to heights that and capabilities that I didn't know existed. But I think it's getting right to that edge, right? And it's where your engagement is really high, right? That you're totally in the moment. You have focus. You're not distracted. um, there's like, yeah, for me, it might be some trigger words. It might be feeding off a certain teammate, right? That's what I would say. One thing about you is that I love just kind of preparing for the game with you because there's like a certain amount of kind of your body language, how you were preparing, and I think that could be a lesson for players in a team, like kind of gravitate to some of those guys that will help you get to that edge, right? That right level of engagement. I also, there's a young player, Bubba Fairman. He said, I don't know if you know Bubba, you probably know of him, played against him, but he's got a great personality, really bright. He's a guy that's always kind of laughing, keeps the room light. But he said he used to always get in a lot of trouble growing up because that coaches thought, hey, you need to be more intense. You need to be this. You need to be that. Where it just that's his way, right?
Mm,
He likes to
mm.
kind of keep things like that's his state, right? And so I think kind of knowing yourself, what works for you, what doesn't, maybe a little bit of trial and error, but in finding those little triggers and strategies to help you get back to that your optimal state and understanding like there's that difference between optimal and like peaks. And I think sometimes we're chasing peak and peak's never going to happen, right? Where I use the Patrick Mahomes example last year when he injured his ankle, right? He could be lamenting that, he could be stuck, oh, woe is me, or understand that, okay, I'm injured, entering the biggest game of my life, right? How can I make the most of this, right? How can I understand that it's not going to be perfect, but I got to try to make it optimal for me. And I think there's going to be some trial and error in that. And it goes back to, I'd say, kind of break it down into these little victories, right? As Ben Ives would talk about, you know, a mentor of you and ours together, like that Navy SEALs mindset. Those little victories can help you get to that high level of engagement. And I understood sometimes when it got past that point where I'm too engaged, where now I'm working against myself, I'm being detrimental, or I'm maybe too loose or laid back, or kind of that feeling of being lethargic. And yeah, so it's the one thing is we've talked about this a lot. There's some psychology to that, but even like understand, why do we respond differently after a loss and a win? Right? Where after a loss, there's more urgency. There's that more like we're after a win. And Steve Kerr talked about that with the Golden State Warriors, right? There is a little bit of that psychology that we've won so much, right? That it's how to keep that level of engagement. So that's a challenge that we got to deal with kind of daily.
I mean, I'm just nodding along. I have so much that I want to say. I just got to choose. And I think the first thing I would say is you don't want an absence of fear. You don't want an absence of emotion, like you talked about. A healthy dose, right? It comes from the movie Chasing Mavericks, the big surfing movie about focus, right? Fear is healthy, panic is deadly. And it goes on the idea of Yerkees-Dotson curve, right? Where it's the inverted U. It's your level of performance is optimal at the right level of arousal. And if you look at that, it is about knowing your numbers. I mean, if you're an athlete, you need to look up Yerkees-Dotson curve from 1908. And Ben Ives called it proxiety, right? Using the anxiety or arousal for you, and then knowing your numbers, right? You brought up Bubba versus yours. It's a little bit different. You needed to be higher on the arousal level before you got into panic mode or too grippy and too edgy, or you fell off the edge, let's just say. And then the other side is boredom or apathetic. And the last thing I would say is weird name, but the guy who talks about flow channel, Milhigh, Csikszentmihalyi, is the idea of taking that arousal control and following a flow channel so that you're taking on the tasks in your life that you're skilled at. And if you're not skilled at it, I do mean mentally and emotionally and spiritually as well as physically, right? Then you're going to have that anxiety or that nervousness because you're not prepared for it. But if you are prepared for it, right, you can actually go to a whole nother level by getting to that edge, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense. And it's definitely it's an amazing feeling when you can get to that edge, right? And I think it's hard to just kind of turn that. It does, to your point, go through a lot. It's a lot of in your preparation and the accumulation of those little incremental steps, right? And I think that as athletes, we need to be really in tune with that. We need to be really in tune with those steps, right? And what works and what doesn't work. And I think, and also again, I go back to that little bit of license where it's not going to be peak, right? It's not going to be peak, and that's going to come. Maybe you have all this little routine. You've done everything right, and then something unforeseen happens, right? And allowing you to say, okay, that's okay, right? Whether it's going down early in a game, right? Whether it's making a big mistake early, which is hard for athletes to get over. Picture a first shift, right? And I remember one of my first starts playing against Duke. I prepared all week, watched film on this particular player, knew everything about this player, and then my first shift, I got ran by and scored, right? My second shift, I try to go make a play and I take a penalty. There wasn't a third shift, right?
Wow.
So it's like, okay, maybe that was too much preparation. Maybe that was.
How'd you come back from that, Brodie? Right, because nobody thinks of Brodie and that story. So how'd you come back from that?
So that was my first ever start against Duke, and we ended up winning the game. But it was my freshman year, and there was an injury ahead of me. That's why I had that opportunity to play down low, close defense. And it might have been a few weeks before I could even get back on the field. So I was kind of sitting on that for a little while. And but for me, I'm finding that balance where I need to prepare, and I think that's important. But I also need to play kind of instinctually and free and
Mm.
on my toes and aggressive, and so trying to find that balance as well, where it's not overly, a little bit of paralysis by analysis, if you know what I mean. Right.
Definitely. And if you'll allow me just real quickly to talk about the strategy real quick, like when you do find yourself getting too emotional, how do you get back on course? And I think there's that macro things that you need to do off the field and you can't worry about in the moment. You have to get to know yourself, work on these habits, train, understand your numbers and what works for you in the moment. It is about, and I'm capturing from what words that you said. You said trigger words. I would call that verbal cues. So finding those words that will that when you say them, they get you programmed to high performance. So Brandon McManus, kicker for the Colts, I believe, right before that ball is snapped, he whispers "smooth and through," which to him means kick smoothly and follow through. So it's programming for your game when at whatever you want to stay doing. I love how you said feeding off a teammate, focus on your breath. And then to stealing from Novak Djokovic, he would say conscious breathing and self-talk. Like that's his main thing that he's always coming back to because he doesn't have the teammate. He's on an island there at Wimbledon, right? So he needs to find a way to take multiple conscious deep breaths and then have that emotion channeled, which, it's arguable. Can you control your emotions, right? Because emotions come from verbal language. You can channel and harness them by saying words that support yourself. And I think that's really what he was pointing to. And I love how you brought up, it is an amazing feeling when you get there and you have to be in tune with that as an athlete. But I would say any performer, Brodie, any performer, whether it's a coach or an entrepreneur or an artist or a musician, right? You just have to be in tune with what works for you. And I will turn that into a question. You gave great advice for the high school and the college, but what about the pro, right? And then the pro that wants to keep going to that another level. What advice do you have for him or her?
Good question. It's funny because if you go into a pro locker room, right before a game, just had me thinking of those verbal cues, right? I feel like the team, each individual player is kind of searching for that, right before a game. You see a lot of heavy breath, you see a lot of kind of pacing, right? And these are kind of good ways, I think, to get yourself good examples of that. Those being around high performers, like you're repeating things. You're repeating things to your teammates, right? So I always find that kind of interesting. You walk in a locker room, just different voices, different cues with yourself and with others. For a pro, um, I think the margins are slimmer. I think everything matters. I'd say that it has to become your lifestyle. I think that it's looking at like much more holistic approach. So like obviously the physical, your strength and conditioning, kind of the technical, tactical side, the mental. I'm sure you've seen this, right? Kind of those buckets that we're trying to fill, like the mental, emotional side, your skill work, your leadership qualities, right? I think all those things you need to have. You need to keep kind of filling those buckets and at a high level. And so it's for me, I'm trying to think of that because I never would have imagined I could get to that pro level when I was a younger athlete, and then once I got there, I felt like I felt like I was just maybe the
Brodie, you said that on the first podcast as well, that you never really saw yourself becoming what you are. Do you think that was that you did have that deep dream of playing at the highest level, or you just were so focused on your process that it carried you there?
I think it was so focused on the process. Like I remember even that first Georgetown practice, which I referenced there, is like I'm like, holy, I don't know where I'm going to fit in here. The players are so strong, right? But then I think with every I guess in simple terms is a term you've heard, and we probably have said in a locker room before. Is be where your feet are, and be the very best version of yourself where you are, right? And so I think that's kind of held true. Like at each level, yeah, maybe the standards get higher and the stakes get a little bit higher and higher, and the bargain. But um, I think if you're kind of focused on continually improving and in all those little buckets, I think that will help with your sustainability and longevity. From college and then transitioning into sport or into the pros, where you kind of reset and start all over again. You become that rookie or that freshman all over again, right? Where you got to have to kind of go prove it all to yourself and to others. But same kind of thing though. My rookie year, I had some great leaders and mentors. I played with Gary Gait my first year. Right, one of the best players of all time, if not the best player of all time. Humble, great leader and teammate. Never complained about anything. He would get the biggest, toughest matchup. Guys slashing him. He was the best ground ball guy. He was just kind. I think that's a very valuable attribute as a leader, is just kindness, right? I'm a young 23-year-old. Here's Gary Gait as a veteran on the team. And okay, I'm going to watch what he does, how his poise, and Tom Marichek, and playing with Mike Powell, who was kind of my rival, right? And then picking up some of these things from those guys and trying to make it your own, but also try to meet their standard, right? And so I think that process at every level kind of resets, right, as you get to higher and higher levels. I'm sure that's the same in school, right? And from high school to college to even beyond, right? The work life, professional life.
There's a idea that you provoked in my mind that's got me gripped lately, because I just learned that this was the case. There's a biblical idea that the meek shall inherit the earth. The meek shall inherit. What does that mean? The weak person. But it doesn't mean that. It means those that know how to wield their sword but keep it sheathed. And I love that, because that means that you can and you have the aptitude and the capacity to do so, yet you choose humility, cooperation, and kindness. And I think if you're just kind and cooperative without the ability to use it, right, there's nothing truly admirable about that. I think when you brought up Gary, the reason why you admired the humility and the kindness is because his tenacity and ability and veracity. And I think the best athletes have both: the ability to compete and the ability to cooperate. And it's really, you have to own your role and do it better than anybody, and then also cooperate and be kind. And you just can't be too much of one, or else you're not as great of a teammate. Is that something that you would agree with me on?
And I think of that. Like I think of how cool it was for him to invite me out, and enjoy a beer with him after a game. But then when it came time to go, in his own way, it was a level that I've never really seen before. It's like, wow, okay. Yeah.
Take us there, Brodie. Take us there. What do you mean?
For Gary, it's his physical side. I mean, he was built like an NFL tight end. His skill level was, again, his shooting, finishing ability, combination of he just had the combination of everything as a lacrosse player. But to see it live as a teammate, and to him, I think he scored 8 goals when we won the MLL Championship that year, and against Nicky Polanco, was the best defenseman in the world. And so that's pretty, it was just a level I hadn't seen before. And you get to being around him, you got to see that, and he had a great quote recently before his season. right? I don't know if you saw it, but as a player and both as a coach, he just goes into every game believing that he's going to win.
Mm.
Right? That's just he has a belief, an inner belief that he's gonna win that game, right? So
There's nothing more important, Brodie. I mean, there's definitely something I wanted to touch upon, and I'll get to it right now. And I think you can have these limiting thoughts, negative thoughts, and the opposite of that, opposite of doubt, is thoughts that serve you, self-talk that serves you, right? Who am I? Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. Hands can't hit what the eyes can't see. If you even dream about beating me, you better wake up and apologize. Everybody knows that's Muhammad Ali, right? But he was talking like that and talking like that and talking like that, and then generating evidence, right? Both mind, body, and spiritually, right? Training and training and training and training. You bringing up the holistic approach or the integrative approach, right? The word health comes from the Latin wholeness. So all of it, right? How are you doing socially, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physically? What I wanted to bring up, and I wanted to throw this idea because I'm thinking it through, and who better to talk about? I really think ultimate belief is conviction. And I think that's an inner ideal that you're looking to make an outer reality. And I think once you rep something out strong enough, you can get to conviction, right? The Gandhis of the world, the Martin Luther Kings of the world, any leader you truly admire has conviction, right? And it's this unwavering inner narrative, right? Because to me, in sports psychology, belief is the number one thing. You have to have a feeling of certainty that the story you're telling yourself is something that you can do on that any given time. And we know what happens when you lose it, right? We just know what happens. You don't have a snowball's chance. So do you believe what I'm saying in terms of conviction being that ultimate promised land that you're after?
I definitely do, and I think that you got to earn that with yourself, right? You have to earn that belief with yourself through the work that you put in, and I think that there are definitely some moments where being on the right side of that, not hoping but knowing, right? And I think I use the analogy of going into a test in high school, and you're nervous, you're uncertain, because maybe you had just crammed the night before. But we've all had those tests too, where you sat down and you studied, you put in the time, you put in the work, and you're walking into that test excited, right? And I think as an athlete, that's what I would try to get to a point where I'm not hoping, right? I know what's going to happen. I know I'm confident how this is going to play out, right?
I know it's not in your bones, Brodie, but I want to go to the fact that you did prepare for that Duke, that Duke game. You did prepare, and you still didn't perform. Well, I know this isn't in your bones, but you could have given up. You could have packed it in. Why didn't you? Why? Where did that patience and that I'm not going to go anywhere anytime soon come from?
I do think that you have to respond, though. Yeah, I think it's a game. Like the game's telling you something, right? That's telling you something. These are signs that, hey, I'm not ready. What do I need to do to better in the next if and when the next opportunity comes, right? That I'm not gonna squander that opportunity away. And I think it's going back to your routine, your preparation, those little things that you can tweak. You're always tweaking and adjusting, always refining, adapting. I think that's in life. If you have that mindset, right, it's going to serve you well. Is that you're always responding and adapting. I think that was the biggest thing. And somebody would ask me, how did you play until you're 41, 42 years old? I think the word I will go to is adapt. You have to adapt, right? You have to, as you age and maybe become a little bit more limited, or maybe it's, position or whatever. That's I think that's got to be. It's like that healthy kind of fear that you talked about, right? Is a little always paranoid that am I ready? But it's not gonna cripple me either. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of the fun in it, though, too. The game's always teaching you these things and these lessons that, hey, maybe I'm not there yet. Maybe I need to. This is just expose my preparation And I'm going to be stronger for that, though. I'm going to be
Right.
stronger for that. And I'm going to
Again, it's that reframe that we were talking about, something that I do from the coaching capacity, even if it's one-on-one. When a player's down or the team or group is down, you ask them, is it a right or a responsibility to be playing at the Hill? Can anybody wear this jersey? Just anybody? And the coolest thing about the word responsibility, ability to respond. Isn't that cool? It's like in the word, right? So, right. When you have a responsibility, it's actually your responsibility to have the ability to respond. And I think what I find so fascinating, Brodie, and the reason why I wanted to talk to you again is if you went back to end of February 2020 and listened to our first podcast together, you were talking about routine and consistency. And now you're talking about adaptation. And I think you need to have both, right? When things don't go the way you want them to, you have to adapt. What would you say?
I think you have that foundation, right? You have that foundation of routine and consistency with that flexibility and openness to evolve and adapt, right? And I think that's I've always had, kind of having those staples that give you a little bit of I'm not sure the right word is comfort, maybe confidence in your preparation, but also again knowing for those unforeseen unpredictabilities that come up that maybe you can't always prepare for, right? So being agile and being flexible, I think there's got to be a healthy kind of harmony between the two.
And it's a yin yang symbol. So have you ever seen that yin yang symbol, right? One side's order, one side's chaos, and the meaning or the flow state is found in between those. So you want to have the order of your routine, but you also want to have a little bit of chaos. Like you don't want the Hill Academy playing against fifth graders, right? That's too orderly, too boring. But you also don't want them playing against a Premier Lacrosse League team or an NL team. Right. So you want to make sure you find the right competition that brings them into the zone. So let's talk about that tweaking and evolution. I did want to talk to you about, and you brought up a few already, your hardships and the evolution of your motivations, right? Because right now you're a father, you started your career differently, but could you talk maybe about the evolution of what drove you at different levels, or was it the kind of the same through line every step of the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's as now like a proud dad of three, you're kind of maybe a little bit more kind of aware. You're trying to pass that on now. I think that's been my shifts from playing now to parenting and even coaching, is that you're trying to pay that forward. But it's kind of the same thing where it just had me thinking of coaching young 11-year-old girls, is that going through practice and practice objectives. That's one of the things I want to accomplish there, is I want them to be in the moment, right? And have that high level of engagement. And that's kind of where I'm going to start as a coach, right? Is like, I know as a player, when I was at my best, I was on that edge. I was in that high level of flow or engagement, or however you want to term it. How can I get them there as a coach, right? And I think joy and fun, making it fun and creating, I heard this quote, like a feedback loop, right? If it's fun and engaging, and the player is going to want to keep coming back and want to keep playing. And I just heard, Wayne Gretzky talk about that, how people would always ask, how many hours? He's like, I don't know. I loved it so much. It's what I wanted to do. I wasn't counting the hours. Right. And so how can I do that as a dad? Right. And how can I do that as a coach in their day-to-day life? Or how can I make reading fun? How can I make, things that we want to encourage, right? Things I want to encourage in myself, things I want to encourage in either the players that I'm coaching or the kids under my own roof.
You brought up an idea that I went back to because I was teaching a course with Dr. Rob Gilbert, sports psychology. And in the book, The Winning Takes Care of Itself by Bill Walsh, He says, if anything happens in the game that was not practiced, that's on the coach. And I love that because it gets you prepared for the different moments. And I think one of the things I always enjoyed that Shea did at Yale was one goal games. He would always do that at the end. And it was like totally unfair. It was like, you're down one with 30 seconds and like they have the ball. It's like, why? That's too chaotic. But it really wasn't, right? Because then you find more calmness in the game. And I think, you have to release the control because you have the cap on instead of the helmet on, right? But you want to make sure they're prepared for that moment by putting them in the situations in practice so that when they go out there, they can have that quote unquote confidence. And I think that's the transition.
I've been drawn more to that as a coach now is those, I heard a good quote on this is repetition without repeating. Okay. So taking, like prioritizing some things in the game, how you want to play, but also thinking about situations that come up frequently in games, right? And repping those out, not in a kind of robotic way, but okay, that example of being down by a goal with 30 seconds left. Well, that's good. That's going to come up, right? So how can we create confidence in the game and how does that going to look in a game? Well, probably coming out of a timeout. So let's come out of a time. Let's come together. Let's talk. Let's think about it, and then let's go rep it out. But I also like kind of breaking it down into smaller segments. For example, if you're working on one-on-ones, well, when do one-on-ones happen? What if it's it's a shot off an end line, right? So okay, shot off the end line, go set up. How does that look? How does that feel? So that when you get to a game situation, it's not new, right? You're prepared for it. You repped it out, but understanding that every circumstance is going to be a little bit different. Every game is going to take on a different shape. But I think it's more just that feeling, right? That's what Coach Shea was trying to create there. Is that okay? I'm in a national championship game or I'm in the Ivy League championship and we're down by a goal with 30 seconds left. I've done this before. There's a little bit of a routine to this. Like I said, that consistency, right? And routine combined with adaptability, right? Where, okay, I've repped this out a lot of times, but it's pouring rain right now, or it's a snowstorm,
right.
Or it's beating hot and it's a national championship. Again, optimal versus peak.
Right.
And so I think that as a coach with my coach hat on is looking at those different scenarios, maybe breaking them down into smaller chunks and then repping those out. Right. Mm-hmm. And those smaller segments of the game. And then also kind of in its totality too. I like kind of that mix. So I think it's really important, with your coach's hat on to be very lockstep with your strength and conditioning coach. Right. So him and I have kind of created a plan where we're looking at smaller segments of the game, and working on kind of the conditioning and the repetition of those situations in smaller segments, kind of medium segments, and then full field segments. And that's been a really helpful framework for me as a coach, is that, so picture those smaller segments, that smaller area, right? It's going to be one-on-ones. It's going to be two-on-twos. It's going to be fast, explosive movements. Well, that medium segment's going to be more 3-on-3, 4-on-4, right? Kind of increasing that. And also from a conditioning standpoint, you're kind of building up some capacity. And then full field is going to be those 5-on-5, 4-on-3 continuous where you're using the entire field. And more situational play, right? Where you literally have a list of different scenarios that could come up, common themes to reinforce your team identity, but also have you well equipped for all the various unpredictabilities that are going to happen.
Amazing. Just 2 points that I want to grab from you is when I had Kyle Harrison on here, he was talking about the importance of position and specific training, right? Like you don't just train for no reason, right? You got to know your specific position that you'll be training and rep that out. And then also situationally specific, right? I think I love how you said starting one-on-ones on the end line. So you kind of have that mental imagery in your mind that like it's going to be the same way before. And it's no difference than being a student, Brodie. When you said that the student has to be prepared for the test, they kind of want questions to be asked that they studied before. It better be kind of similar in that capacity. And then the second point that I wanted to make was on your thought that you brought up a few times now about the difference between optimal and peak. I'm always encouraging focus on excellence over perfection, because perfection is kind of self-abusive in a way, because like right when you mess up, it's like, oh geez, now everything is gone to waste. But if you focus on excellence, which James Clear from Atomic Habits would say never miss twice, right? That's his whole idea, never miss twice. If you want to go out late, because you're staying up socially, don't miss twice, right? Don't make these bad habits continual, right? Look for ways to reset, right, and refocus, whether that's in the day, in the game, or in the moment. Brodie, kind of like one of the final questions I have for you is, you're making this transition now. You've had such an illustrious career, and you're probably even going to have, if it's possible, a better coaching career. Could you talk about the things that you're bringing with you as an athlete, and maybe the things you're leaving behind, or as you're developing your coaching philosophy?
Yeah, I've been trying to think about that a lot lately, and actually working with Coach Holman this past week was nice because he, kind of reaffirmed some of these things, and he's kind of he's had so much experience. I think he said he's played or coached in 9 national championship games, and so just it was some really good conversations with him, but also in the last few years, just all through my time in the game, just being really clear on things that I value, things that really resonate with me through the game, and um, and just these kind of guiding principles that I think that young coaches need to kind of start with, right? Is what are some things? And for me, it's I touch a lot about I'll touch on many of them today. Is right. One of them is conditioning. That's one thing that you can control. So I want all of our teams to be in great physical condition, right? And be real. And my challenge as a coach is I want to be forward. I want to use kind of best practices, to help challenge and support them that way. The other one is kindness, right? I use that word, and it's from one of my dad's best friends who 7 or 8 years ago passed away from ALS, and he was an accomplished CFL football player. And he wrote, I should share this book with you. He wrote a sports psychology book, and he said the most important attribute in a football player is kindness. And that's kind of counterintuitive, right? You see the gridiron and how violent and at times that sport could be, but a football player that's kind is going to be coachable, is going to be a great teammate, right? Is going to have humility, and so these are little things that I'm starting to kind of pluck as things that resonate with me. So kindness is going to be another kind of staple for me as a coach, right? As I want all our players to, and staff to have that and to display that. Oh, another word that I love is tenacity, right? I look at you play as a player, you're tenacious, right? I think of a lot of championship teams and levels. It's that word that it's hard to describe, but you know it when you see it. It's tenacious play. I want our players to be, in pursuit in a tenacious way and a relentless way. And so that's another kind of staple for me is that I love for our teams to be tenacious. And so I can go on, but they're all kind of things that for me it's like an old coach of mine, who kind of founded the Orangeville Northmen here, legendary coach Terry Sanderson. You played with for his son Josh, right? It's this. The other word is discipline, right? It's just daily decisions determine destiny, right? Just having discipline every day in your work, and that word again resonated with me as a player, and now it's been cool because you and I'd say that you're a good example as well, is that we've been playing in parallel with trying to figure these things out as a coach, or in your case, as a sports psychologist, right? And we're not immune to these things. We're as much as we're coaching and talking about these things, we have to deal with these struggles, right? And so I think having these little guiding principles to go back to and we brought this up with our cannons team. It was cool, and Coach Holman and was talking about like, let's get more like, as time goes on, you're drawn back to the core of the game, right?
Mm.
And the core is a skillful game. It's a finesse game, but it's also a game of toughness, right? Where talking to Jeremy Thompson, right? They have an annual game on their reservation where everybody plays, right? With wooden sticks and no equipment. Contacts allowed, slashing's allowed, right? You know this. When you get slashed, right? That's a little test,
Oh yeah.
right?
Oh yeah.
That the game's going to teach you a little bit of a lesson that way. And I think that's so to me, toughness is there too, right? Because I think in how you respond to that is really important. Like getting hit and not and getting not and getting hurt too, right? And how do you the lessons that we learn from getting injured, right? Obviously, there's a underlying health and safety line there for sure, but also within the parameters of the game, these are lessons that I think that are important that we have to be open to. And so, as a coach, what resonates from all these things, like a Coach Holman or a Terry Sanderson or a Tony Proudfoot, or from my dad, from all these from my parents, my siblings. I think if you take time to think about those things and shape that identity, right? The things that have worked for you, that you believe in, that are kind of become your non-negotiables, right? And so that everybody has a license to be their own, bring their unique personalities, but these are things that we can't bend on, right? That are going to be staples.
In a nutshell, Brodie, if I was to say what sports psychology is all about, right? Sport being a continuous series of problem-solving events, and psychology being the study of mind and behavior. But really, what it is we're in the response business, right? So, you like, how do you handle getting slashed? How do you handle to a loss? How do you handle a win? Right, which is, as we've learned from Ben Ives, right? Sometimes it's even harder to come back from a big play, a good play, right? Because it's about being even keel. But everybody wants to respond from a bad play or a loss, right? But how do you maintain that humility? You brought up something pretty impactful. Sorry for the loss of your father's friend. The kindness really gripped me there, because Dr. Rob Niederfer, one of the founding fathers of North American sports psychology, actually took a more, what should I say, mechanical approach to sports psychology. And then after losing some friends, as I've heard it, maybe it's apocryphal, as I've heard it, lost some friends in the Twin Towers and became a very spiritual guy, and wrote a book called The Role of Faith in Performance, which is all about having a humble heart. And he thought that was the most ultimate thing that you could have in sport, is a humble heart, because that gives you that freedom. You brought up discipline and the daily decisions determine destiny. The definition of discipline that I love is making promises to yourself and keeping them. And then the final thing that I would say is, you brought up how we're figuring it out along the way. Certainly, it's what got me into sports psychology. Your pain becomes your purpose. I've shared my story along the way throughout this podcast, but like figuring it out and knowing that. Thanks, Brodie. Yeah, tenacity, but it's also your strengths are your weaknesses, right? So I got to learn how to find, that middle ground that serves me through self-awareness, good communication, and then responding the right way. Is there any question or topic that I should have asked you along the way that I didn't?
No, I think that, I'm just thinking there's some, I always pick up these little tidbits from you, but I think as much as you're responding, and there's kind of that. I love it. I've been kind of thinking about it a lot lately. It's a track and field term, but like 85% rule, right? 85% rule is that, because when you're kind of in that last race, and if you have that 85% rule mindset, it gives you a little bit of that freedom for yourself to relax, right? And in relaxing, you can take it actually to another level, right? And so kind of having that a little bit of that peaceful mindset. So that's another sprinting term, right? If you have a peaceful mind, so I want you to try this, Mark. Okay. and it carried through to other sport, lacrosse. The next time you're sprinting, repeat the word peaceful, and have a peaceful mind when you sprint. You're going to run faster. Okay. And so, I think that's a good way to look at kind of that 85% rule and going into a game. Okay. So if I'm going in to play in the national championship tomorrow, 85%. Okay. I want to, I don't want to, I know 100% is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Right. But 85, I need to be, because I need to make some plays too. I need to contribute. I need to make, I want to go for it. Right. But I understand that, okay, there's going to be that time, those moments of 15% where it doesn't, and that's okay. Right. That's okay. But if I go into the game thinking I need to play a perfect game because it's a national championship, I only get one shot at this, then maybe when that breakdown happens, that mistake happens, it's tough to get yourself back out of that. Right.
I mean, Brodie, it's amazing that you brought that up, because I didn't say this earlier, but I was going to. I had Dr. Nick Molinaro on this podcast, and he shared with me, he's a clinical psychologist and sports psychologist, primarily of golfers. His research found that 5 to 15% of the time do we reach actual peak performance. So 85% of the time it's optimal. So it's crazy that you brought up 85, because that's actually research back. That Brodie, I don't know how many games you played. Do you know the number of lacrosse games you played? But say it was, 1,000, more than that. Say it was 1,000, right? That means like 150 games you were outstanding, right? It's probably hard to understand that you were optimal or worse in well of the majority, right? And look at you, Hall of Famer, jersey up in the rafters, right? So it's about that game.
You can probably look at that, and there's something to that for sure. You can, and that ratio feels right. So yeah, I think it's just, and if I were to say with level of engagement, right, it's probably around that 8.5 out of 10.
Right.
Like you want to be at that in terms of arousal level, right? In terms of that adrenaline, emotion, and so I think it's a good way to frame things as you're going into a game, or and the word peaceful when you're sprinting. Funny things starts to happen, right? Your face relaxes, you become a little smoother, right? And I think if you can have that kind of steady, peaceful mind during chaotic events, right? Your performance will get to a higher level.
Well, Brodie, I mean, I really enjoyed it. I probably could talk to you for several more hours. I know I could. How about you just leave listeners of this Grateful and Full of Greatness community? I love how your first answer is what you learned from your career. It had a lot to do with gratitude. But is there like a final message you would leave people with that are listening to it?
I would say, just it's you got to enjoy the journey, right? That's always been a saying of Coach Urick, my old coach. And again, it's you pick all these great influences that you've had on yourself over your life and career, but it's about the journey and not the destination. And I think being present in that day to day through your sport, through school, all those things, I think will give you good perspective. So, thanks for having me on, man. It's been, you have had a big impact. It was so cool, and I would recommend. I'm going to go back and listen to your podcast with Ben, because it was cool to kind of go through that stage alongside you guys both as two big impacts on my life and career.
Yeah, Brodie, I feel really lucky to have met you along my journey as well, and I'm sure the future is going to be bright for both of us in our relationship. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, man. Anytime. And until the next time, 4 years from now.
That's right, 4 years from now.
Make it a date.
All right.